From an authoritarian abroad to an authoritarian here at home. A federal judge has cited Donald Trump's, quote, own words and actions as evidence to suggest that he was in a conspiracy with extremists to overturn the 2020 election. District Judge Amit Mehta rejected Trump's request to toss out lawsuits by members of Congress and police officers seeking damages for physical and emotional injuries incurred on January 6th. In a scathing 112-page opinion, the judge said that Trump's words show that he and the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, quote, pursued the same goal, and that Trump would have known his words were understood as a, quote, call to action, and that his response to the violence made it all the more plausible that he was involved in a, quote, tacit agreement with the rioters. Joining us now, former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC contributor Barbara McQuaid and Charlie Sykes, who is still here. Barb, this opinion is a barn burner. I could quote from it, but maybe I will. But first, I just want to ask you what you make of it and why it's important.
April Fool's Day 2026, and the punchline lands squarely on Donald Trump. The man who spent years hiding behind presidential immunity just watched a federal judge tear that shield apart piece by piece. Judge Amit Mehta didn't simply reject his claims. He took 112 pages to methodically dismantle every single argument Trump's lawyers put forward and left nothing standing.
John, the reason it's important is it says that these lawsuits can go forward. You know, ordinarily a president is able to use immunity to get out from under civil lawsuits. Anything he does within the scope of his presidency is up for immunity. But what the court said here is he wasn't acting as president. He was acting as a disgruntled candidate.
Well, that's hard to say. But, John, this is just a remarkable moment. We have been talking about this for 6 years. But think about this. I was thinking about what Ambassador McCall just said about, America standing up to China at a moment when we are so bitterly divided. And here we have this evidence that the former president of the United States engaged in seditious activity, that he abused his office, that he was part of this effort to block the peaceful transfer of power. This is an amazing moment. And I think that the positive thing that we need to focus on is the fact that there are still avenues to hold him accountable. I think the great tragedy would be if Donald Trump was not held accountable for his conduct in all of this. So, whether it's going to be the Department of Justice or whether it's going to be the January 6th Commission or whether it's going to be these civil lawsuits, you have to hope that something comes of that, there are consequences to this, and that people are paying attention to what this man did and tried to do to this country at a moment of great peril and of great crisis.
And here's what makes this so significant. The judge looked at everything Trump did around January 6th, the speech, the phone calls, the pressure campaigns, and said none of it qualifies as official presidential conduct. Not a single bit of it. This wasn't a president doing his job. This was a losing candidate throwing everything at the wall, trying to hold on to power he had already lost. The Georgia phone call alone tells you everything you need to know. Calling up election officials and pressuring them to find just enough votes to flip the result is not something any president does in the course of their duties. That is a candidate committing what most legal minds consider a serious abuse of power. And now a federal judge has put that in writing for the entire country to read. What this ruling actually unlocks is where things get really serious for Trump, because discovery in a civil case is an entirely different beast from anything he has faced before. We are talking about subpoenas for private communications, internal White House records, text messages between aides, emails that have never seen daylight, phone logs from the days surrounding January 6th, every single conversation about fake electors, every moment someone tried to warn him what was coming, every decision he made while that mob was moving toward the Capitol, all of it becomes fair game now. And then the depositions begin. This is the part that should genuinely keep Trump up at night. In criminal court, he can plead the fifth and walk away relatively clean. Civil court operates by completely different rules. Stay quiet and the jury gets to assume the worst. They are legally permitted to look at his silence and conclude he is hiding something damaging.
January 6th, President Trump was acting on behalf of the American people, carrying out duties as President of the United States. Now, in response to Judge Chutkan's ruling in the D.C. case, the rhetoric amped up a little bit more. He said that the, quote, radical Democrats and President Joe Biden are trying to, quote, set dangerous precedents that would cripple future presidential administrations and our country as a whole in their desperate effort to interfere in the 2024 presidential election. And there you have it. Let's not forget that he is, at the same time as these cases are making their way through the courts, also running in the 2024 presidential election, trying to get through this primary and then on to the general. And look, this these two rulings are troublesome for the former president. The federal appeals court ruling allows a number of pending cases that were waiting for what this three-judge panel were going to do, that were waiting to proceed, and now they can move forward because of what happened here. And the ruling from Judge Chutkan rejects one of Trump's really best and only claims to try to dismiss this D.C. case. Now it is absolutely moving forward. And one line from her ruling that really stood out to me, Alex, she said that just because essentially you were the former president of the United States, that does not confer a, quote, lifelong get out of jail free pass. And that case is set to begin in March. That is the case that is most likely to really play out all through the election cycle here, and getting in just before potentially Super Tuesday, set to begin March 4th, Alex.
Hey, Dasha, I'm curious, since you're there and Donald Trump is supposed to speak there shortly, have you gotten a chance to talk to anybody there in the crowd getting reaction? The fact is, these people are out. It's cold. I see how you're dressed. It's the middle of Iowa. You know, these people are coming out in droves to see him. Do they sympathize with the president, or does anybody see him as deserving, I guess, these kinds of rulings, and really question the way he thinks? Or maybe people aren't in droves there. I mean, how crowded is it?
For a man whose entire political survival has depended on controlling the narrative, that is an extraordinarily dangerous position to be sitting in. Think about who is actually bringing these cases. These are not political opponents or partisan operatives. These are Capitol police officers who went to work that morning to do their jobs and came home permanently changed. One officer suffered a serious concussion and broken bones after being overpowered and beaten during the assault. Another was hit with bear spray and sustained hand injuries that never fully healed. And then there is the family of Brian Sicknick, who collapsed and died after the attack, with his partner pursuing a wrongful death claim that now moves forward. Sitting across from these people in a courtroom and being forced to answer for what happened to them is something no amount of political power can prevent. Their injuries are documented, their suffering is real, and a jury of everyday Americans is going to hear every word of it. Now let's talk about money, because this is where Trump's history becomes genuinely damning. He has been down this road before, and the results have been ugly. Eugene Carroll took him to civil court twice and walked away with over $88 million in damages after two separate juries found against him. He skipped closing arguments, dismissed the verdict publicly, appealed aggressively, and still lost every single time. Before that, Trump University collapsed under fraud allegations and cost him $25 million in settlements. The Trump Foundation was forcibly dissolved by court order, and he was made to pay $2 million back for misusing money that was supposed to go to charity. His New York business empire was found liable for sustained fraud, and he was handed a judgment exceeding $350 million. Every single one of those was a civil case. Every single one ended with Trump paying. And now he faces a courtroom full of injured officers with documented evidence of what he knew and when he knew it. Legal analysts who have watched his civil record closely are already suggesting the potential damages here could dwarf anything from the Carroll cases. His legal team is doing what they always do, making noise and threatening appeals. But something revealing happened right after this ruling came down. The window to file an emergency appeal directly to the Supreme Court opened and quietly closed without his team even attempting it. That is not the behavior of a side that believes it has strong arguments. That is the behavior of lawyers who looked at their options and decided the odds were simply too bad to risk the embarrassment of another rejection. The Supreme Court's immunity framework was built around criminal cases tied to core official duties. What Mehta ruled on is civil liability for conduct that was never presidential in the first place. Getting the court to intervene here would require a completely different legal argument, and even Trump's own attorneys apparently couldn't construct one worth filing. So discovery moves forward. Depositions get scheduled. People inside Trump's orbit who have never had to answer questions under oath about January 6th are about to find themselves in exactly that position. And unlike everything else Trump has faced legally, there is no pardon waiting at the end of this road, no loyalist attorney general who can make the case disappear, no election victory that renders the whole thing moot. Civil court exists in its own universe, and presidential power simply has no currency there. What this really does is something deeper than any single legal outcome. Trump has built his entire political identity around being untouchable. Every indictment got repackaged as persecution. Every conviction became a fundraising opportunity. Every legal setback transformed into proof that the system was out to get him, and his supporters ate it up every time. But there is something different about sitting in a civil courtroom while a police officer describes losing feeling in his hand permanently, or while a widow explains what it was like to lose her partner in the aftermath of that day. That imagery does not package neatly into a persecution narrative. It is human, and it is heavy, and it is the kind of thing that sticks with people in ways that abstract legal arguments never do. The slow grind of civil accountability may ultimately do more damage to the Trump myth than any criminal prosecution ever could have.
It's crowded. I mean, there's a very long line. I don't know if Steve, our cameraman here, can show you. There's a very long line. The event's not set to start for a few hours here. It's not set to start till 3 o'clock Central Time, 4 o'clock Eastern, and already people are waiting in line to get in. And look, this is a Trump event. So the people who are here are major fans of former President Trump. And I'll tell you, whenever rulings like this that go against the former president come out, his fans come in. They come in, they rally around him. But the thing is, there are people here in Iowa, especially, and Iowans, of course, they want to kick the tires of all of the candidates. So you've got this, about 35% of Republican primary voters that are basically immovable, that are going to be at his side no matter what. But you've got another, 60, 70% that are not certain or are never Trumpers. And they are absolutely concerned about rulings like this, and about the distraction, most of all, that it poses to the country and to the real issue.
It keeps January 6th present and visible. Every filing, every deposition, every document release pulls that day back into public view and reminds people not just of what happened, but of the specific choices that led to it. And unlike a criminal case that ends with a verdict and fades from memory, civil litigation stretches on, generating fresh coverage, fresh revelations, and fresh reminders at every turn. 5 years on from that day, the criminal path has closed, but this one remains wide open. No pardon touches it. No appointment blocks it. No rally speech changes what is written in those 112 pages. The door is open, and Trump has no key that fits the lock. What we may be watching is not a dramatic final act, but something quieter and in some ways more powerful. A former president being made to sit still, answer questions, and face the people his actions hurt, in a room where his title means nothing, and the only thing that matters is the truth. For a man who has spent his entire life avoiding exactly that moment, civil court may turn out to be the one place he simply cannot escape. And think about what comes next as these cases actually move through the system. Every document that gets released through discovery becomes a news cycle. Every deposition that leaks becomes a headline. Every piece of evidence that surfaces in court reminds the public all over again of exactly what this man did and exactly what he was willing to do to stay in power. There is no controlling that. There is no spinning it away. His communications team can put out all the statements they want, but once those documents start flowing out of that discovery process, the narrative belongs to the evidence, not to whoever is managing his social media. And here is something that does not get talked about enough. The people around Trump, the aides, the advisors, the inner circle figures who were in those rooms and on those calls, they are about to face something they have never had to face before. Sitting across from a lawyer in a deposition room and answering questions under oath with no presidential protection covering them. Some of these people have never been fully exposed in a legal setting. Some of them have information that has never come out publicly.
Getting up in Trump's grill on some of these issues, it seems, if I could use non-legal parlance.
She's a good writer.
Yeah, she
we'll
is.
Say that.
Yes,
she's a sharp writer. She's a very sharp judge. And in this case, a lot of these cases they win or they lose on what happens before the trial, what the judges do on these big legal questions. Donald Trump was making a very big bid here to get this case tossed, saying that because he had been the president at the time that this had happened, he had some protections. He wanted there to be an immunity because of the Constitution, because of the presidency. And Judge Chutkan said, this just isn't in the Constitution. It's not what the people who wrote the Constitution wanted to allow for presidents, and that if former presidents didn't have the ability to be prosecuted for things that they did in office, then that would not be part of what the Constitution wants us to have as equal justice under law. She says it's essential to be able to bring cases like this, to have justice work in this country. And so she denied Trump these arguments he was making, but this is a really big issue that has to get settled. And now we have the judge ruling on this and saying, let's go. We're going to move to trial. There are a couple other things she has to look at and say whether she will, toss certain charges in this case, and some other things he's argued. But this was the big one. Yeah,
Shannon, it sounds like the Trump defense strategy is to say immunity then, immunity now, immunity forever. I mean, he wants immunity from everything. What's your analysis of what came down from the judge yesterday?
I think it's a very good analysis, very sound. Just like in the civil matter, the Court of Appeals reasoning was very sound too. I do think, from my legal analyst perspective, it's a little bit of much ado about nothing on the constitutionality issue. No question it's the constitutional law interpretation, but it's so fact specific to this particular president. I mean, yeah, it'll rise again the next time we have a former president running for re-election who's charged with 91 counts. So he obviously is trying to wield a lot of times the First Amendment, as his defense here. It's all pretty much of a red herring, though, because, of course, common sense non-lawyers would say, of course, a former president can't have a permanent get-out-of-jail-free card, as she wrote. It makes perfect sense not to do that. But our legal system tries to be so fair that no matter how off the argument is, you got to wind through the system that way.
Civil discovery has a way of pulling things into the light that every other process somehow missed. We may end up learning more about what actually happened in those final days before January 6th from these civil cases than from everything that came before them combined. That is not a small thing. That is potentially the most complete picture of those events that the public has ever had access to, and it all happens in open court where anyone can watch. Beyond the legal mechanics, what this moment represents is a fundamental test of whether accountability in this country actually means anything. Trump has beaten or outlasted almost every single legal challenge thrown at him. Criminal indictments, impeachments, civil suits, investigations, he has survived all of it and turned most of it into political strength. But civil court operates on a different timeline and with different rules, and it does not care about election cycles or political wins. It just keeps moving. The officers who were injured on January 6th deserve their day in court. The families who lost people deserve answers. And the country deserves to finally have a full and honest accounting of what happened and who was responsible. This ruling from Judge Mehta is not the ending of that story. It is the moment the story finally gets the legal foundation it needs to move forward properly. Whatever comes next, the depositions, the documents, the trial itself, it will all happen now because one federal judge looked at the evidence and decided the law was clear. No immunity, no escape, just accountability. Drop a comment and let me know what you think. Do these civil cases finally deliver what the criminal courts never managed to, or does Trump somehow find a way through this one too? Hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell because we are not letting go of this story for a single second. See you in the next one. Stay safe.
पेपर कार्ड है